Give me one moment, Drew.
Sure.
Hi, Susan. Mom, Susan's at the door for you. Okay, I'm back.
No, that's our cold open. Let's be Welcome everybody to episode 3 now of And Another Thing. Joining us in the wonderful world of cyberspace now as we completely break format for episode 3. But that's okay, because we're back and I'm here. I'm Drew Weisberg, your host as always. Joining me again is my co-host, Mr. Isaac Wilde, on our never-ending voyage to talk about literature, film, TV, and anything else in between that we think you should take another look at. And today's topic is one that we've definitely gotten hyped for, Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah, coming back to it as an adult, I was shocked at everything that was packed in there for both the kids and for someone like growing into a more critical mind like myself. Like it works for every age.
Right. It's exciting. So today we'll be kind of dividing our discussion into the 3 seasons, or books as the show puts it. We'll start, of course, very quickly off here with book 1, Water, which is the series' establishing season, sets up all the major plot points, and also I think it's the most episodic of the show.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As it lets the characters find their footing in little vignettes and side stories. It gives us a good introduction of them without leaping right into the main plot without the necessary empathy for the readers to care for the characters. Yeah, it's a very good foundation.
Right. I was going to talk about, just right off the bat, the show focuses on kids who are between 12 and I believe 14, with Aang, the main character, the eponymous Avatar. The Avatar in this world being someone who can control all 4 elements that exist in this world. The 4 elements of the world are described in the introduction. It's water, earth, fire, and air. And there are people known as benders who can control these elements, almost as though they have telekinesis for a specific part of this element. So say you're a water bender, you can do certain moves that are based on real-world martial arts that causes the element to obey your will. And this can extend to things like bending water into steam or ice. And so each element sort of has these sub-elements built in. And what's interesting is, again, there's only one person in the world who can bend all 4 elements. It is the Avatar, who is a literal, spiritual, and physical manifestation of the unity of the 4 nations that are divided by these 4 bending elements. So we have Aang, who is 12, I believe.
Yeah.
Katara, who's 13, who's a waterbender. And then Sokka, who I believe is 14, who is a non-bender. He's just...
Non-bender. Exactly.
Season 1, one of the interesting things I wanted to touch on was how these characters actually feel like kids.
Yeah, that's such a big point to the show, that these characters are introduced, and so often in Netflix movies you have high schoolers played by 23-year-old actors and all of that, but these kids sound and feel and interact with each other like kids. Aang's first words are, I want to go riding on the penguins, or something like that, where all he wants to do is have fun.
Mm-hmm. And that plays into a lot of moments that I think people say are out of character, when in reality, to me, it just feels like that's a decision a child would make.
Yeah.
Because kids are irrational and still finding their footing, and they're 12 and 13 and 14, and they're traveling the world. Of course they would have misadventures and make mistakes, which is another thing that season 1 allows the characters to do quite often, is it allows them to make mistakes.
Yeah, and tying into that idea of childishness, it's like the characters are childish enough to put too much importance on some things or not enough importance on other things, and the show allows them to be really flawed.
Mm-hmm. Speaking
What
of
were you going to say? Sorry, I interrupted you for a moment.
no, please. Speaking of flaws, we do need to talk about the season's primary antagonist, Prince Zuko of the Fire Nation. It should be mentioned that the Fire Nation are the aggressors in this show. They are the villains of the piece. And he's accompanied by everyone's favorite character as an adult, that being the retired Fire Nation General Iroh, who is the brother of the current Fire Lord. Prince Zuko is, in this first season, which begins with Aang being awoken from a ball of ice that he's been trapped in for 100 years. And so the thought was the Avatar had died, that the cycle of reincarnation, as every Avatar cycles through the various nations. First, I believe the cycle goes water, earth, fire, air.
I think that's what it is, although I always get it wrong.
I'm pretty sure that's it. But it's just the podcast, no one's going to be mad at us except everyone who'll be mad at us. I would joke, but this fandom is rabid enough now that I really do not want to irritate Avatar fans, because releasing it on Netflix has just lit a fire under them, and I would really prefer not to draw their ire. So the Avatar is essentially a myth. It's very similar to the feeling of sort of how Jedi are set up a bit in the first Star Wars movie. It's very much that idea of, this is such a long dead culture, because the air nomads into which Aang, the Avatar, was born, were wiped out by the Fire Nation because they knew that the reincarnation cycle of the Avatar would lead from the previous Avatar, Avatar Roku, who was of the Fire Nation, will be reincarnated into the air nomads. And so Aang deserted his post as the Avatar, as we learn in one of the most chilling and, again, heart-wrenching episodes of season 1, that being The Storm. And we see the effects that... I lost my train of thought for a second, so there's going to be a cut here, because I'm sweating.
Deserted his post as Avatar was where you were.
Right. Deserted his post as Avatar, as we see in The Storm. And now he wakes up 100 years later, and his culture is dead, which is some of the heaviest moments I've seen in a children's cartoon.
It's so bold of them to write a genocide in terms that children can understand. I had a really neat discussion in a college classroom about whether or not what topics are suitable for children to discuss and how to approach them. And genocide was one of the ones that came up. Should children know about this? Should children be aware of these kinds of effects? And Avatar handles it with such poise and delicacy and poignancy that it shows a kid interacting with the remnants of the culture he'd grown up with that's now extinct from the world, and shows him breaking down, and it's a really humanizing moment.
There's a very interesting episode that I don't think gets enough airtime, where they visit the Northern Air Temple, which has now become essentially a camp for refugees from the Fire Nation, living in the remnants of an old air temple that is now abandoned. And they are building new things onto the existing culture. And there's kind of... Aang expresses some frustration with this, because they're destroying his culture, or what's left of it. And throughout the course of the episode, Aang has to learn to accept the idea that the airbenders are truly gone, and that the only way for the world to progress is for new culture to take its place and to carry the ideas of his culture forward, as they do, because the inventor, who sort of is the unofficial mayor of sorts of this group of refugees, has created flying machines based on the airbenders' designs. So there's a great quote, and I'm going to butcher it here, but I think Aang says something to the effect of, they have the spirits of the airbenders, but they're not airbenders. And there's there's a degree of beauty there and simplicity where they balance out both the idea of being an angry child in that you're watching somebody essentially do these ghoulish things to your culture, but then recognizing his role as Avatar and realizing that his goal to unite the world is bigger than his tragedy. It's a really powerful episode, and that's not a main plot episode.
No, which goes to show a couple of things. One, the level of writing talent that goes into even the episodes that you'd consider filler are just chock full of these amazing statements and moments and emotional beats. And two, it does tie back into what we're talking about, how the show balances the childish nature of Team Avatar, where there you see Aang acting as the child where he gets frustrated, and then you also see him acting in the role that he's meant to fulfill as an adult, as the Avatar. And the balance between that is so well handled.
So at the end of book 1, Aang goes to the Northern Water Tribe to learn from the greatest waterbending masters in the world. And that becomes the first major story arc of the series where the plot becomes more than just one episode. It becomes a much, there were 2-parters apart from this, but I believe it's a 3-parter for the Siege of the Northern Water Tribe, where everyone comes together from the first season. It's Aang, Katara, and Sokka all together there at the Northern Water Tribe, as well as Zuko and Iroh, who have been captured by an even worse firebending general named General Zhao. General Zhao, who is much more of a mustache-twirling villain than Zuko. Zuko is conflicted. He's, I believe, 15 or 16, and he was outcast by his father, the Fire Lord, for defying him. And the only way he can restore his honor is to capture the Avatar, which is a fool's errand until the Avatar returns to the world.
His father had originally sent him on the task as a way of permanently banishing him, having no idea that the Avatar had just then been returned to the surface.
Which kind of leads Zuko to be this, first of all, he's supremely intelligent, but he's clouded by anger, which makes him a very fun antagonist because he is not shown as being evil. He's shown as being aggressive, but almost not of his own choice. And there's a scene where he gets trapped under some ice and he's punching, and you realize how determined he is because he just puts his hands against it and uses the last of his breath to channel his firebending and burn through it, where he then starts shivering in this air pocket and he's just trying to light himself up, so that it's such a painful scene because it's such a visceral feeling of you're almost drowning too. The show's very good at conveying these visceral emotions, and it really makes for a fantastic scene.
Oh, for sure. It's one of my favorites too. It struck out to me because dedication and perseverance is a protagonist's defining character trait. Every protagonist has that as their character trait, or it's a subversive show. And the subversion is that the protagonist doesn't have the character trait of determination. And to see Zuko, the villain, with that same determination, you are rooting for him in that moment, even though he's trying to capture the titular protagonist. You want him to break out of that ice. It's so cool.
Book 2, to me, is the most plot-driven of the seasons, and personally I think it's my favorite because of that.
It's where the show hits its stride big time.
There's never a dull moment in season 2. There are middling quality episodes in seasons 1 and 3. None of them are bad. They're all very entertaining, but they aren't as impactful as a lot of the episodes in season 2. And in season 2, the main plot is essentially the Avatar gang discovers that there is a day called the Black Sun, which is an eclipse. And during certain cosmological events, various bending tribes will gain or lose power. Waterbenders,
like the full moon.
For waterbenders, exactly, which is what happens during the siege of the Northern Water Tribe, and they become immensely powerful. Firebenders become more powerful during an event called Sozin's Comet, named after a former Fire Lord, which makes them absurdly powerful. But on days of black sun, aka eclipses, they lose their powers. And so the gang discovers an eclipse is coming by summer's end, and so they think this will be the time where we will gain the support of the Earth Kingdom, which is geographically the largest of the four nations, and we will have an invasion, and we'll take out the Fire Lord, as is Aang's destiny, which they must do before the end of the summer, which is when Sozin's Comet is coming. So everything's on a timer. Book 2 gets interesting, though, because Aang's pet, the only remainder of his culture, that being his giant flying bison, but this season revolves around the conflict of trying to get this information to the Earth King and get this. But there's also a new member added to the team, which, Isaac, I want you to talk about, because this character is your favorite character in the show.
Yeah. 7 episodes into book 2, Aang really needs to find an earthbending master, and he's just having terrible luck. The Earth Kingdom has a lot of culture that he isn't, Aang's a free spirit. He doesn't like the traditional aspects of it. And he needs a teacher who will match his who will match his intensity and his willingness to break rules. So as 12-year-old kids would decide to do, of course, they decide to go to this WrestleMania style event where the coolest earthbenders in the world are fighting with each other. Like, that's the best place to find a teacher.
Of course.
Yeah. There's this massive earthbender named the Boulder. The Boulder will smash you and all of that. And there's a guy named the Hippo who eats rocks with these like buck teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Then, Sokka's going head over heels for the Boulder. He's in love with this. And then this little blind 12-year-old girl steps onto the stage and trounces all of them, beats each of these epic earthbenders in rapid succession with brilliantly choreographed moves. You can see the solidity in each of her motions. That's like I wish I could do the hand motions, but she like pushes her hand forward and a slab of rock flies sideways. She makes an immediately striking contrast on screen. As I mentioned, Avatar is a template for story writing. There's such a lesson there in how contradictions between a character's physical appearance and who they are as a character make for really interesting characters. And Toph, the girl in question, is a great example of this, where her diminutive stature is so immediately eye-catching in comparison to her unbridled power as an earthbender. Mm-hmm. But Toph is more than just a bit character, because there are no bit characters in the show. She's really complex because she's hidden this power from her family, because her family treats her as this weak, sheltered, blind girl who can't do anything for herself. So the Team Avatar, the gang, inspires Toph to break away from her family, to run away, to live the life that she's always wanted to lead but couldn't before. And she decides to join Team Avatar and have these adventures. And she is such an amazing addition to the Team Avatar dynamic. She has conflicts with Katara. She has friendships with Aang and Sokka. She's got this witty, dry sense of humor. She's just a joy to watch on screen. And it's so cool to see how just shifting an established dynamic between Aang, Sokka, and Katara ever so slightly with a new character makes it so refreshing.
Toph plays really, I'm glad you said about changing the dynamic, because Toph plays really well into this season's theme of changing dynamics. Much as the seasons are changing around the protagonists, so too are their feelings and motivations. As I said earlier, this is the season where we see Aang go from being this sort of happy-go-lucky kid to a more aggressive, emotional character because of his only remaining tie to his culture being taken from him. Touching a little bit about probably one of everyone's favorite episodes from book 2 is Zuko Alone. The sort of, I would say, unofficial highlight episode for Zuko this season, where we really do see that like transition occur, where Zuko goes from being a minor antagonist to a fairly strong protagonist, which is where he begins to see the effects of the Fire Nation on the Earth Kingdom. And he sees that not only are there impacts in terms of, yes, these Fire Nation soldiers have raided these villages, but also that the power vacuums they leave behind have led to greater aggression, where he has to duel these Earth Kingdom soldiers who are using the local lack of military presence to almost become raiders in of themselves. It's a heavy theme, once again, for a children's show. It's the idea of war profiteering.
Yeah, and to have such a heavy theme in place alongside such a character arc that a child can get behind, alongside like all of these different like literary references to old Western movies, it all comes together in this really neat, perfect storm.
It's a highly unique episode, and it's been talked about to death, but for very good reason. I think that it's one of those episodes where, you know, I went into it thinking, oh, I'm not above this episode, but I'm definitely, you know, I have other favorites. And I kind of came away from that one going, no, that was really good. That was good. And I feel a little bad for being as critical as I've been. Again, we can't really talk about season 2 without talking about the now main antagonist, Azula, who is Zuko's sister, who is sort of his opposite in a number of ways, but represents simultaneously the best qualities about Zuko and the worst qualities about Zuko, and it gives us sort of a marking point to see where Zuko is in his journey.
Yeah, Azula is like an optimized version of Zuko. She's like, Zuko is a failed child in the eyes of the Fire Lord, but Azula is like the perfected version of that, where she has all of Zuko's intelligence and ability and prodigy, but none of Zuko's good-naturedness, none of his warm-heartedness.
At the end of season 2, she wins.
Yeah.
She full wins.
So cool.
Uh-huh.
It's so neat for a children's show to have the protagonist lose in spectacular fashion.
So book 3, Fire, begins with Aang in a coma after the call with Azula. The Avatar has an ability known as the Avatar state, which is essentially God mode. But Aang was taken down in the Avatar state. And so now he can't enter the Avatar state again. And he is left in this almost, I would say it's a physical representation of his post-traumatic stress disorder.
That's well put.
Mm-hmm. And it is a physical scar on his back. Aang has a very distinctive design, which is tattoos that are in the shape of arrows going across his body. And there's a great image where it shows his back. And there's this massive scar about this big that is breaking that line. It's a great example of character design telling the story in of itself. But season 3 is interesting because you go from a heavy plot season to, it kind of goes back to episodic for a good series.
The first half of season 3 are some really fascinating episodic episodes where the Team Avatar is hiding in the Fire Nation dressed as Fire Nation soldiers, and they interact with all manner of different facets of Fire Nation culture in episodic fashion. Aang goes to school in one episode, Katara rescues the village in another episode, and the power of these episodes, though they are separate from any main plot, are that they present the Fire Nation as an actual nation, that it's not this clone trooper army of faceless goons, but like a people with different echelons of society, different castes, different wants and desires and motivations and economy and all of that. It really makes it feel like an actual world.
There's a great feeling that I think in season 1, it is definitely Aang's rise. Season 2 is Aang's rise and fall. And then season 3, book 3, is Aang's resurrection and the sort of reemergence of him and him finally having grown into his role as Avatar. There are very few things that I think are like this, but it's simply put, Avatar is one of the most perfect series ever released, period. Not even talking about it in the camp of children's shows where it just blows competitors out of the water.
No contest. Yeah. Yeah, if I have one closing thought to say about Avatar, it's that this whole time I've been mentioning that I think Avatar serves as a template for story writing. And I really believe that you don't need any how to write book if you've watched Avatar. I've been watching myself as I go through personal writing projects, plotting and structuring. I'm like, okay, in Avatar, this is how a relationship between characters is introduced. How can I take that lesson and apply it to my own writing? In Avatar, this is how a character's arc goes. This is how character relationships pull each other apart. How can I apply that lesson to my own writing? And it is such a solidly structured story without it is solidly structured and yet still reaching for the elevation from rote story structure to art, and it's so cool to see.
Mm-hmm. It's really an amazing series, and if you haven't watched it, please go watch it. It's well worth your time, and I don't think you'll quite want to stop at the first episode. So that's all we have from here this week. Thanks again for joining us on And Another Thing. As always, I'm Drew Weisberg. Isaac Wilde. Yeah, that's him. And yeah, I'm really grateful you joined us. So thanks so much. And
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.